Hey, hello everyone. We're here for the committee of the whole meeting for June 24th, 2025. It's 9:30, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. Councillors, we have the agenda in front of us. I'd like to put the councillors to see if there's any additions to the agenda. Administration has flagged that they would like to request in-camera item under land and legal. So we'll add item, let's call it 10, well, we'll make that 11 in camera, and then adjournment will be agenda item 12. So in camera 11, land and legal. Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Melnick.
Move to approve the agenda as suggested with the in-camera.
Thank you for that. All those in favor? Or none opposed? That carries. So that was the a motion to approve the amendment. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you for that, Councillor Keller-MP. All those in favor? Or none opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item 4 is the committee of the whole minutes from June 10th, 2025. Is there any business arising from these minutes? If not, we'll move on to delegations. Agenda item 5, delegations. There are no registered delegations, but this is an opportunity for the public to address council on any items associated with agenda items. There's nobody in the gallery at this point and nobody coming to the mic, so we'll move on from delegations to correspondence. There is no correspondence on the agenda, and moving into new business. Agenda item 7.1, advertising bylaw 2025. CAO Gibbon.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Wilson. Administration is here with a recommendation that council give first reading to the advertising bylaw, and that council set August 5th in quorum room as the date, time, and location for the public hearing related to this bylaw. Historically, the municipality of Jasper has done lots of advertising for statutory hearings and meetings. We've done that under the general requirements of the Alberta Municipal Government Act, which required that the municipality publish notices for 2 consecutive weeks in a newspaper or other publication circulating in the area. As council is well aware, we no longer have any print publications in the community, and so we can't meet that requirement of the Alberta Municipal Government Act. The Act does provide the opportunity for municipalities to identify the other ways that they will ensure that advertising for public hearings is widely circulated. In order to do that, the municipality must pass a bylaw specifying what those methods the municipality will use are. And so that's why administration is bringing this forward. In the attached bylaw, you will see that administration is recommending specific advertising methods in section 3. So when we have to bring forward a statutory advertisement, it'll be posted prominently on the municipality's official website for a period of 14 days. And we may also, and that would essentially meet our statutory requirement. We would also post what are called convenience copies. So these wouldn't be the official ones, but we would post convenience copies to increase public awareness of statutory hearings like public hearings on the municipality's social media accounts. That is intentionally broad in that it allows us flexibility as social media may change over the years, on notice boards at municipal facilities, so using physical advertising across the community, and other means as deemed appropriate by the CAO, which provides us opportunity to identify other appropriate methods that get broader distribution. But again, the real key to this is 3.2.1, which identifies that the way that the municipality will meet the requirement for public notice of public hearings is through posting on the municipality's website. And again, this is in recognition that we no longer have physical print publications, which is the minimum that is required in the Municipal Government Act, unless council passes a bylaw like the one that's proposed here. I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, this is to ensure that we're in compliance with the laws of Alberta. And administration is recommending that council give first reading to the advertising bylaw. The committee recommend council give first reading, and then that we set August 5th as the date for the public hearing related to this bylaw. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Councillors, Councillor Gilliland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. To Mr. Given, I was at an Evergreen board meeting yesterday, and we actually had a conversation about media. And the Fitzhugh actually are actually printing, and they're delivered in Hinton. I'm not sure if they're planning to, I guess they're operating out of Hinton, because I was saying, we were talking about advertising, and we were saying that how our seniors, one of the things that came back to us was that they really like articles that like to read the newspaper. And I said, oh, we don't have Fitzhugh anymore. We print them. Oh yeah, we do in Hinton. So I'm wondering if it's just that they can't get it here. I'm wondering if we could check in with them, if they're planning to actually eventually come back into Jasper with the print. I just found it, like, I was quite surprised yesterday when I heard that, but yeah, so the seniors, our Jasper seniors in Hinton are reading the Fitzhugh, but our Jasper seniors here are. So I was wondering if it's just that they can't get it here, maybe with the new regional service, if we come up next week and roll that, I'm sure.
Deputy Mayor Wilson for Councillor Keller MP. So certainly administration could look into that. And if there were a print publication, I think that we would probably resume our practice of advertising their publication. That would be allowed for under this bylaw, and certainly if that was possible, we would do that. I think that would now fall into other methods deemed appropriate by the CAO. And so we can follow up with the Fitzhugh to see if they're going to resume distribution within Jasper. In any case, the bylaw is still relevant because it provides, a lot more flexibility than just operating under the general terms of the Municipal Government Act.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Wilson, my only question for Mr. Given is with respect to the provisions of the Act, which require that if council is going to pass a bylaw to change the advertising, the wording of the Act, if I can find it again, is that council must be satisfied that the method the bylaw would provide for is likely to bring proposed bylaws, etc., to the attention of substantially all of the residents in the area. So that's a duty on council. The proposed bylaw is to delegate that duty to the CAO. I'm not sure whether there's a provision that says we could do that. It's not that I don't trust your ability, but the Act specifically says council has to be satisfied. Could we say we're satisfied if you don't?
Mayor Wilson for Mayor Ireland. Mayor Ireland, I would suggest that the CAO is actually an enhancement at the end rather than sort of the commitment that the municipality is making. In the proposed bylaw, 3.2.1 this is the point that meets our statutory obligation. So is council satisfied that posting notices prominently on the Municipality of Jasper's official website for a period of 14 days meets, would substantially inform? Or should we put other things in that required advertising? So essentially the 3.2.1 is what our bare minimum of advertising is. And the question in front of council is, does council believe that that is sufficient? So that the CAO part of it is sort of any other ways that we can think of to increase exposure, right? So that provides broad, it's an enabling passage, 3.2.2.3 really enables the CAO or administration to use other means in addition to So the question for council is, do you think that 3.2.1 and 3.2.2 give broad enough reach?
All right, so your reading of those three subsections is that they would all apply contemporaneously. So we could do 3.2.2.1, 3.2.2.2, and 3.2.2.3 all at the same time, but we would have to at least do the first two. And then we could do more at your discretion.
Deputy Mayor Wilson for Mayor Island. So I would say that 3.2.1 posting on the municipality's website is required in all instances. Under 3.2.2, you'll notice that there is a may in there. And this is for convenience copies. So the convenience copies are optional. And there are a few different described ways that we can do convenience copies, but they are not the main commitment. The main commitment is 3.2.1. So if council wanted to say, well, no, we think that only on the municipality's website is not enough. And we think that it should be on the municipality's website and on notice boards in municipal facilities. Well, then you should move, direct administration to make that change to bring 3.2.2.2 up, so that it's in 3.2.1, for example, right? And that would say you must A, post it on the municipality website for 14 days, and B, post it in municipal facilities. Those are your required things, and you can do extra things if you want. The 3.2.2 is the extra things if you want.
We're good. You've convinced me. Yeah. 3.2.2 is only with respect to convenience copies. Gotcha. Thank you.
Councillor B.
I do worry, I don't know if just on the municipal website will reach a broad range. I think if we were to put it into kind of like our utility sheet that goes out bi-monthly, something like that, but I do know not everybody goes to the municipal website, not everybody goes to Facebook. We have a demographic, especially, we have some seniors that are social media and they do go on websites, but we have a lot of people that just don't use computers. And I have a feeling that we won't reach a number of our residents if we just leave it to the website.
Mr. Gibbon.
Deputy Mayor Wilson for Councillor Keller MP, appreciate that that's the case. And so administrations and the municipalities in a bit of a difficult situation. We have an obligation, if we do not pass an advertising bylaw, our obligation under the Municipal Government Act is to advertise in the local paper, which we talked about whether, well, maybe we can meet that if the Fitzhugh starts to distribute in Jasper again, which we're not in control of that. Right? The other way that we can meet the requirement of the MGA is to mail something to every address in Jasper every time we do a public hearing, which starts to have a cost implication. So if we don't define how we wish to do it, we're obligated to follow the MGA. And since we don't have a paper, that means anytime we do a public hearing or a statutory, something needs to be advertised, a statutory sort of meeting, then we need to do it through mailing to every Jasper residence. Which again, not every Jasper resident has a mailing address. So I'm not even sure that would meet everyone. So you can appreciate that this is a challenge many municipalities across the province are going through. The sort of downfall of traditional print media and the changing landscape there has made this an item that a lot of municipalities have had to contend with. The proposal in front of you here is administration following what is sort of accepted practice in municipalities that have passed these advertising bylaws. The other challenge, and again, convenience copy might be relevant for some of the other methods you mentioned. We could make mailing out in utility bills, another method that would be where we'd have an obligation to do that. Some challenges would be that, number one, not all Jasper residents receive utility bills. And number two, utility bills only come out bi-monthly. And so that would all of a sudden start to constrain council's ability of when you would hold meetings. Again, it's not completely impossible. We may just find that it might become unwieldy.
Go ahead.
Have you considered a mail drop? Like, if like at the post office where you get the flyers, like, our past MP, Mr. Soroka, every, a couple of months, you'd get a drop for him in every mailbox. And that's something we could consider.
Deputy Mayor Olson, that's exactly what's allowed for under the Act. So if we did that, we would be meeting the obligation of the Act. And so there is a cost associated with that, which is probably substantially more than either advertising in the local paper. You know, for the local paper, maybe it's a matter of $500 each time you do a public hearing. I think doing a mail drop would probably start to be in the thousands of dollars every time you do a public hearing. So we could choose to do that as our method of meeting the obligation under the Municipal Government Act. There would be additional cost associated with it. There would be some additional timelines in terms of, and which administration hasn't necessarily followed up to get a great deal on. But there would be the additional timelines associated with getting that to Canada Post and having it inserted. And again, the difficulty that not all Jasperites have a post office box. So I think we're probably, the difficulty with public advertising is not all of the public goes to one place. And so whether it was utility bills, post office boxes, print media, website, social media, it is difficult to guarantee that any one of those will hit every Jasperite. And so administration is, again, following the best practice that we've seen in other municipalities. And the core of this is to ensure that we can be in compliance with the law of the land as it is today. So if we pass a advertising bylaw, we can come and amend the methods that we want to use in the future. But as it is today, with the absence of print media in the municipality, we would be obligated to start to do mail outs anytime we want to do a public hearing.
Yeah, Councillor Waxer, or sorry, no, not Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Wilson. My other concern with a big mail out is the environmental impacts it has, because you go to the post office and you just see those flyers in the recycling bin. The Senior Society has a newsletter that goes out, I think, every week or every 2 weeks. Maybe you could join that if something comes up, or the What You Heard email newsletter through the chamber, which might have a bit more reach. But I'm satisfied with this RFD.
I'll just take the opportunities as well. That what's the periodic? You're like how? What's the sorry? How often would we be advertising? Approximately.
Well, I would say that it would be infrequent today. This will become more frequent as the municipality takes on greater responsibility for land use and planning authority. So once we have a land use bylaw, any change to the land use bylaw becomes a statutory hearing. So we'd have a public hearing. There are a number of other items where the MGA may require similar statutory hearings. So, I would say it would be right now a couple times a year. In the future, it may be more frequent than that. The other thing that I would point out is that today we're not asking council to decide on this bylaw. We're recommending that council take the bylaw forward for first reading. And at that time, there can be discussion and debate on the merits of the bylaw and potential amendments if council wanted to make any. So just as a reminder that we are not actually asking for a decision on the merits or the content of the bylaw today.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just one, I guess, further question. Do we have the ability, and I think we do, but it might be maybe frowned upon, but to push notifications to people's devices would be another option to, maybe not leaflets in mailboxes, but getting individuals to register with the municipality to get those push notifications for, items like this.
Deputy Mayor Wilson, yes, that's a functionality that we have. We do try to reserve that, for emergency alerts at this time. And we absolutely could create a category to allow people to sort of opt in to receiving those kind of notifications, choose to receive a notification anytime there's a public hearing coming up. And again, at this stage, they're not particularly frequent. They may become more frequent in the future, but that certainly would fall in other means deemed appropriate by the CEO. That's a method that we could put in there.
Okay. Councillor Boxer?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, through you to CEO Given. You mentioned at one point in responding to the mayor's questions that the bylaw could be amended to include under 3.2.1, something like posted prominently on the Municipality of Jasper's official website for a period of 14 days, and convenience copies posted on municipal media accounts and notice boards at municipal facilities. Is that what you were recommending, or you were suggesting might be a possibility? Because I thought that to some degree that might better satisfy the last whereas, where it says where council deems it appropriate to establish alternative advertising methods and is satisfied that the advertising methods set out in this bylaw are likely to bring matters to the attention of substantially all residents.
Yeah, Deputy Mayor Wilson for Councillor Waxer. So yes, if council wanted to, so essentially, maybe an easier way to look at this would be 3.2.1 is the mandatory ways that things must be advertised. 3.2.2 is the optional ways that things could be advertised, the additional ways. If council wanted to make more methods mandatory, you would include them in 3.2.1. But we wouldn't call them convenience copies because they're
now
mandatory. Yeah.
Councillor Melnick?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, and through you to CEO, Mr. Given. The way this is written gives you a lot of flexibility under 3.2.2.3 to use communications, perhaps to the chamber communications, perhaps through Jasper Tourism. It gives you the opportunity to, if appropriate, do a mail drop. And also, I read that to be if we choose to use the utility mailing list, instead of waiting for the actual 2 months, every 2 months. I don't know if that's something that could be used, or do people sign up for that mailing list for their utilities strictly for receiving their utility bill? There seems to be a lot of options under 3.2.2.3. And the only one that seems a little gray to me is the utility mailing list.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Wilson, for Councillor Malik. So yes, that last provision, I'm going to stop with all the point twos. That last one is the one that provides that sort of ultimate flexibility for administration to identify the methods that can reach the most people. So I think you're absolutely correct there. I would want to go back and confer just around VoIP and legislation. My immediate sense is that people receive a utility bill for one purpose, and we use that opportunity to sometimes to squeeze additional things in there. But to go to additional mailings to that same list, we may have an obligation to ensure that people opt into that rather than we just choose to send them something that isn't a utility bill to the list of people that have utility accounts. Does that make sense? But we could, encourage people to sign up through our utility billings on a regular cycle, and that would be another method that we could use. But again, we'd have to make sure that my instinct is that by legislation, we wouldn't be allowed to just use that, begin to use that list for other purposes other than utility bills.
And thank you for that, and I appreciate the answer, and you're right, I think before we start taking mailing lists and using them for whatever purposes, we better be sure we are certain of what people signed up for. Before we start thinking that we can just do that to send information out.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, through you to Mr. Gibbon, and I apologize for belaboring the point. I am still concerned about 3.2.1. So that meets our statutory obligation. The rest is to enhance that, but that's how we meet our obligation. The obligation, if I can paraphrase the act, is that before passing the bylaw, so I can agree that we could get through first reading and then go to a hearing on this, so we can pass the bylaw. But at some point prior to passing the bylaw, council must be satisfied that the method that we are going to use is likely to bring the matter to the attention of substantially all of the residents. And I agree that the website is probably the best option that we have, maybe the only real option. But can council say that that is likely to bring the matter to the attention of substantially all the residents? If it doesn't say a majority, so I don't know how much substantial is. I haven't done research on that, but is it 2/3? Is it 75%? I don't know what is expected to be substantial. And I don't know that we have any stats, so I'm wondering whether administration would have any prospect of providing council with information about how widespread is the use of our website among residents, so that we can answer that final question. Is it likely to bring the matter to the attention of substantially all of our residents? Because that's our statutory obligation. So I don't know whether administration has capacity to give us at a future date any of that sort of information as to uptake on our website.
Deputy Mayor Wilson, for Mayor Island, we can certainly call up stats from the website. I don't know that we'd be able to tell how many are residents, but we may be able to tell where they're coming from, where the traffic is coming from, whether it's from in Jasper or from somewhere else. So we can certainly look at that for when we get to the public hearing on this matter, when and if. The other point that you raised, though, really is, I think you've identified weakness in the Municipal Government Act, which is the act that says that if you don't put things in a newspaper or send mail every time you do a public hearing, then you have to have an advertising bylaw. So the weakness that you're identifying is actually in the Municipal Government Act requirements that doesn't provide enough definition to what substantially all means.
Anything further, councillors? Not into for a motion. Councillor Waxer.
Thank you. Not yet a motion, but would there be any challenges or difficulties with adding other elements to the 3.2.1? Would that make it challenging for administration?
Deputy Mayor Wilson, I wonder, so if council is inclined to consider changes to the bylaw, I think that there's probably two different ways that we could accomplish that. One, you could, under the alternatives, you could direct administration to make changes to the bylaw, itemize those changes you'd like to see, and direct us to return with a revised copy before going to first reading. Probably more appropriately would be to set the date, time, and location for first for first reading. And then have a follow-up motion to direct administration to prepare changes so we could present them at the public hearing. So again, the development of an advertising bylaw is a statutory, requires a public hearing. And so again, all of the information to be considered is intended to be considered in a public hearing. It's a bit of a challenge to advertise a public hearing when you don't have the methods required under the act to be able to do that. So we're in a little bit of an area where we're trying to tighten this up. So council could direct administration to go away, revise the draft bylaw and come back with a new recommendation for first reading, or you could recommend council give first reading and then direct administration to bring forward some language that could be considered at the public hearing. So either of those two options.
Councillors, any suggestions? Councillor Melnick?
Further, thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, further to Councillor Waxer's point about what is required under 3.2.1. If we were to move 3.2.2.2 about notice boards at municipal facilities and be part of 3.2.1, other 3.2.2 being a second way of us advertising, that would give additional opportunity for individuals who may frequent our facilities, and it would be part of the mandatory process to help to distribute the information as required. Would that be helpful in moving this bylaw forward?
Sorry, Deputy Mayor Olson, I'm not sure that's a question for administration. I think you're asking your council colleagues whether they would be comfortable with that, Councillor Melnick. And, from an administration perspective, we can work under any direction the council wishes to set. Really, it is what, this kind of gets to the mayor's point about, is council satisfied that whatever methods we choose will have, and I'll paraphrase a little bit, we'll have a good opportunity to reach most of Jasper residents. And that's really that's a bar that's up to you to set.
Sorry, carry on, Councillor Melnick, and then Councillor Gallardi.
Thank you. I just wanted to try to enhance, the intent of 3.2.1. And because municipal facilities are used by families, seniors, residents, it would just give an additional layer of accessibility to information. And I'm thinking that if we wish to move this forward, that might be a way of, enhancing our opportunity to advise the public, doing our due diligence under the MGA, which, has been identified as maybe not being clear, and be able to get this to our next meeting for first reading.
Councillor Gallardi?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, and I agree with Councillor Melnick, and I would just like to go one step further. Like when we do projects, when we request proposal, we send a notice to the Chamber or Tourism Jasper to send out to their members. I think, it would be great that if those notice, public hearing notice will go to the Chamber, to Tourism Jasper, and to the Senior Society, so that, we're not putting anything in mailboxes, we're not paying for print. Like it's basically, if we're putting out a notice at the activity center of all our facilities, and we're putting it on our website, I don't think it would be a lot more work to put it out to those three associations. And then we have know in our hearts that we have tried to reach everybody. But just putting it on our website, to me, is, in my mind, it's not reaching everybody.
Councillor Waxer?
I too am not convinced that just putting it on the website is the is sufficient to attract the majority or a large substantial number of residents. But I'm struggling a little bit. I was listening carefully to what you said, but having trouble creating the motion, so I'm open to changes as we speak to that. That committee recommend council give first reading to the advertising bylaw 2025 and bring potential changes to the public hearing. So I'm open to.
Just in terms of process, Deputy Mayor Wilson, so first reading should be just first reading. And again, at this stage, committee's only recommending council because only council can give a reading to a bylaw. So committee recommend council give first reading to the bylaw. The committee recommend council set a date, time, location. And then I would suggest that there's a third motion that follows up to direct administration to bring forward changes to the bylaw to reflect blank, blank, blank.
Go ahead.
Okay, then, that committee recommend council give first reading to the advertising bylaw 2025. And that committee recommend council select August 5th, 2025 at 1:30 PM in the quorum room as the date, time, and location for the public hearing. And that committee direct administration to bring forward potential changes that would as discussed to the public hearing session.
Maybe some clarity on it. Yeah, thanks, Deputy Mayor Wilson. So we've discussed a number of different items. The most recent thing I think that I heard was the hosting and municipal facilities, sort of bringing up that one into the required category. And I don't know if there were other ones. So it might be helpful if council just clarified which of the additional methods you wanted to see as required methods in amendments that we bring forward for your consideration.
I'll make bring potential changes, including the notice boards at municipal facilities to the public hearing.
Councillor Levy?
Could I ask from the amendment to add notices go out to the Chamber of Commerce, Tourism Jasper, and to the Senior Society for their publications?
I chose not to include those because they're very specific, and I worry that in a bylaw, if any of those change their names or don't or cease to operate, offer that it was too specific for a bylaw. That was my thought, but that it would fit under the other means determined by the CAO.
But then they're not mandatory to those organizations, therefore we miss all our business community. Unless our business residents are walking through our facilities or going on the website. Also missing a huge section of our senior society, and this huge section of our senior society that are now residents in Edson and
Understood. Sorry, Councillor Hall?
Thank you. I also agree with Councillor Waxer, because then are we gonna add a habitat newsletter, the J, like we just could add so many if we're specific with 3. If we move it with Councillor Waxer's motion, other means deemed appropriate by the CAO could just always be the Chamber, Senior Society, like there could be a list that goes out. I agree that it might just be too specific, because then there's a lot of other groups that, you know, Senior Society newsletters one, that might not reach the artist, that might not reach the, I'm struggling with that as well, keep like having that pretty specific in the bylaw. And maybe a question for CAO, I know there's a motion already on the table, but if there was a list of other places to send all these notices out, would it just automatically go out to the chamber because the chamber's on the list? Tourism Jasper's on the list and the senior society is on the list, or would it be better if it is specifically named in this bylaw?
Deputy Mayor Wilson, for Councillor Hall. So again, that final point provides, broad flexibility to administration to include all of these ones that might be identified. And certainly, we're paying attention to the discussion. We're hearing council's priorities and we can certainly include them. It also, though, makes it so that we have that flexibility should things change. There is a challenge. So if a entity decides to change names and their specific name is in the thing, then it just makes it a bit awkward, right? That the bylaw becomes out of date and we have to come back and have a public hearing to update the bylaw because somebody else did something. Change their name or cease to operate. And identifying specific individual groups rather than methods. Right, that might make a distinction between groups that we would want to engage with or methods. If we identify individual groups, we're at risk of missing other groups that might be important that we just hadn't considered in the day. The other approaches really are different methods that we might identify. And so maybe council could consider convenience coffees provided through direct distribution to community partner groups. Would be a very broad way. And that would say that we're providing a convenience copy. It's not a statutory copy. So if the group goes away or they don't receive it or they don't post it, it doesn't impact our ability to have a public hearing. But it would say that this is a method that council expects administration to do regularly by doing email distribution to identify community partners.
Councillor Keller.
I really like that idea, but I do like the more we can contact, the better, because then we have done truly our part as council that we are trying to reach all our members in the community.
Maryland.
I'm torn. I'm thinking of making a request for division and vote on the first two of these motions so we can discuss the other one, which is problematic. So perhaps I will call for division. We could, unless there is further debate, vote on the first two motions. That is, that committee recommend council give first reading to the advertising bylaw 2025, and that committee recommend council select August 5th at 1:30 p.m. quorum room as the date, time, location for the public hearing. Those are the first two parts of the motion, and I would ask that we have a vote on those and then return to debate on the third part.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table as read by Mayor Ireland. Does all council understand the motion? So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. And we're back to.
If I could speak to the third part of the motion, and again, recognizing that there is motion, and so shouldn't include our CAO in the debate. My thought is that if administration can come back, not with necessarily proposed changes, but other opportunities, and my thought is that we could conceivably in 3.2.1, which is the one that allows us to meet our statutory duty, perhaps have a provision that would be posted prominently on the website and distributed by email to any group or individual that requests distribution and provides us an email. So we're not selecting who gets it, but there are huge distribution lists already. And we could just say, if you're interested, this is a method that we could use. But we're not going to inundate everybody with unwanted emails. But if you want to be notified in that fashion, just sign up and we'll make sure you get it. I would like the emergency alert. And that seems to me to be a way that I would be comfortable will get to substantiate all of the residents, and particularly all of the residents who are interested in being informed.
Sounds like there was, or it looked like there was head nods around the table, but was there a motion in there?
Well, I was speaking to a motion, and I can't remember exactly the words, but it was a motion to direct administration to come back at the time of the public hearing with suggested changes which would fulfill council's obligation under the Municipal Government Act. And so it's kind of general, but that is one suggestion that might come back from administration, I would hope, on August 5th.
Deputy Mayor Wilson, I'll just flag that I think Councillor Waxer has a motion on the
Yes.
floor, and so she either needs to withdraw it, amend it. But the mayor's motion can't be considered until Councillor Waxer's motion that was,
I'm happy to withdraw.
okay, so Councillor Waxer has withdrawn her motion, so the floor is available for any other motions. Mayor had said that, this proposed motion would be that administration come forward with additional methods to meet council's statutory obligation. It's helpful if council defines what that is, because the bylaw in front of you meets council statutory obligation. You're determining that it doesn't meet the standard that you would like to hit, and that's council's role. You just need to define what you think that standard is, rather than leaving it to administration to define it, because what we probably does meet statutory obligation.
Well, thank you, but of course, that is the debate whether council is satisfied that it does. So my suggestion is that my motion would be that committee recommend council. No, I think committee can do this. Committee direct administration to return to the August 5th public hearing with proposed amendments based on an email distribution list to be subscribed by local residents or groups.
Councilors, everybody understands Mayor Ireland's motion? Councilor Melnick, you'd like to speak to the motion?
I'd like to speak to the process. So we're actually going to be doing 3 votes, from what I understand, because I heard Mayor Ireland suggest that all 3 motions should be voted on separately. And before we start voting, I want to make sure that everyone understands what I understand, or if I've got it wrong. We're going to vote on the first motion, which was to give first reading. Second, we're going to vote on another motion, which is to set the date of the statutory or the public hearing. And then we're going to vote on the third motion that I think Mayor Ireland suggested. So before we start voting, let's be sure we all know what we're voting on.
Had we not voted for the first 2 already?
I don't think I put my hand up to vote on the first 2. I don't know how we could. There was a segregation, was there not? Did you not suggest a segregation of the 3?
He suggested a segregation of the 3, but the first 2 were read together and voted on together. And then the third one is this motion that Mayor Ireland has put forward.
All right, just want to make sure. Because I thought when you segregate a motion, it wasn't clear to me that were we segregating all 3 or we were segregating 2 from the third. So my apologies if I misinterpreted that.
No, okay, yeah, Mayor Ireland.
You did not. I asked that we separate the first 2 from the third. You voted on the first 2 as a unit. Councillor Waxer then withdrew the third, and I made a fresh motion with respect to the same subject matter. So that's where we're at now, I think.
As long as we're out there.
And now, councillors, is everybody clear on Mayor Ireland's motion? And there's no other debate. I'll call the question. All those in favor? That motion carries. Thank you for that. Councillors, I have just a bit of an emergency phone call I have to make. I was wondering if I could maybe pass the chair to either another, whoever's alternate deputy mayor or Mayor Ireland for a period of time, and then I can return. Mayor Ireland, would you like to take the chair, or I'm not sure who is alternate deputy mayor. Could I hand over the reins to you?
You can,
Yeah.
but I also am gonna take a opportunity for us to adjourn for 5 minutes.
Okay.
So that we can do all of this.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. But I should be back, but if it's not back in 5 minutes, Ralph, you can start the meeting. Yeah, thank you.
Good discussion.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and we just had a little change in the chair of the meeting. Councillor Wilson was called away, and I will resume the chair as the acting mayor. And we are now on agenda item 7.2, health and safety policy, and Mr. Gibbon.
Thanks very much. Councillor Melnick, Deputy Acting Mayor Supreme. Administration is coming forward with an update to our existing policy E009, our health and safety policy. We're recommending that committee recommend council approve policy E109, health and safety as presented. I'll be relatively brief because the policy is fairly comprehensive. But really, this is in order to bring us in alignment with current health and safety legislation, both at the provincial and federal level. The existing E009 was adopted in 2012. And since 2012, there have been substantial changes both at the provincial and federal levels around safety practices and required safety practices for organizations and municipalities. Some of those changes are addressed at a high level in the background section of the report. But the key additions to policy 109 are a more detailed delineation of responsibilities across the different levels of the organization, commitments to promoting physical, psychological, and social well-being rather than just physical safety. The new policy also encompasses not just employees, but also supervisors, workers, volunteers, and members of the general public and prime contractors. The revised policy also addresses the prevention of workplace harassment and violence. And so these are, again, the way that health and safety has evolved over the years. We are bringing our municipal policies in alignment with current practice. The updated policy has been reviewed by the municipalities' health and safety committee, as well as the SLT, the senior leadership team, and it's here for committee and ultimately council's consideration. I am happy to answer any questions. I might rely on Director Donaldson if there are any specifics related to health and safety practices. Our health and safety coordinator is not here today. And so between the two of us, we should be able to answer most council questions. But if there are any others, we can certainly bring additional information back.
Thank you, CAO Gibbon. Are there questions for Mr. Gibbon or administration on the policy in front of us? Or comments? Fair Island.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor. For administration, or whomever chooses, just some really small things. The policy statement under 1 the second sentence, I think is just missing a word. It doesn't make grammatical sense to me. The program aims to reduce the risk of injuries, I presume is what that should say. Final word of the policy statement speaks of work sites, and then throughout the document, there is both reference to work site and workplace. Is there an intended difference in that terminology? Because to be inclusive, I wonder why we would describe sites, which typically is used when we're talking about contractors, because they would be at a work site, I suppose, and a workplace for employees, but I wonder whether those terms might be combined. Make it more inclusive.
Thank you. Worship through Deputy Mayor Melnick there. There's nothing in the legislation that would differentiate the two, so they could be interchangeable. With that said, it may be beneficial to include those definitions within the policy. I think that would, upon first glance here, make it a bit more robust. So I think that's a good catch there in terms of worksite parties, that we tend to use the word worksite within legislation versus workplace. But if we do choose to use both, definitions would be the way to go.
Right, thank you for that. In paragraph 2, scope, again, minor wording, but the beginning of the third line of print. It's forward looking, but might we want to say that that is, workplace safety is of primary importance rather than is to be. I think should speak to right now, it's a primary importance, not something that we're going to make important sometime in the future. If I could drop to 3.1.5. Just noted there that it ends with safety standards as reasonably practical. And I can appreciate that from administration's perspective. There have to be some reasonable limits. But that changes from our previous policy, which spoke about maintaining the highest standards. And I wonder whether there might be other wording that could signify that we still have a desire for highest best practices rather than reasonably practical, which just sounds to me to be a little tepid. And again, I just throw that out as a suggestion, but and I appreciate why we're changing from the old policy. This is much more robust, but the old policy at least had the benefit of aiming high. And higher, I think, with that phrase than reasonably practical.
Yeah, thank you for that, your worship there. With that said, reasonably practicable is something that you'll find quite often utilized throughout the legislation within the Act code and regulation. So my assumption based on its inclusion in here is just that it is utilized quite often within the legislation. And back to your earlier point as well too, I think we could look at incorporating more of an active voice versus a passive voice. That tends to be passive voice is used quite often, even past tense, when it comes to health and safety wording. That is something that I'm not necessarily a fan of, if I'm being honest. So I do agree with you. I think active voice would be something that would work quite well within the policy, and we can work with the health and safety advisor and the coordinator to ensure, and the committee, my apologies, to update these slight changes that you've made.
Thank you for that. And my last observation is under 3.5.2C. And that is, workers have the right to refuse dangerous work. Dangerous work is not defined in this document. I presume that somewhere there is a definition of that. I wonder whether the definition might be included. Or is it just subjective to the worker? Which I'm not sure that that's the way the workplace works either. Anyway, I just noticed that we use the word and it's capitalized, but it's not defined.
Yeah, that's a great question. And just to address that, it's interesting how this policy is written. It's quite robust. We would see a lot of the stuff typically within a procedure more so than a policy. However, this is what they're looking for more so nowadays when it does come to the certificate of recognition program. Dangerous work is outlined moderately. However, it can be up to the individual worker's interpretation of how they perceive dangerous work. So it is a bit more difficult to define than the one provided within legislation. Again, good merit from a definition if we feel that we want to include that. I just don't know if I would include that definition within the policy versus the administrative procedures.
That's fair. We haven't seen those, and it's not our domain in any event. And then finally, again, maybe this would be in administrative procedures, but in the previous policy, there was recognized intent to maintain membership in Partners in Injury Reduction Program and to have a safe work practices manual. And I wonder whether we still have that engagement in Partners in Injury Reduction, unless it's changed to something else, and whether we still intend to maintain a safe work practices manual for all of our employees.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, so Partners in Injury Reduction, they are the ones who actually run the core program for the province. So then they have all different types of certifying partners. Ours is AMSA. So we still are partnered with them. It's not common to actually have that within a health and safety policy, so I do agree with it, not necessarily being within it if it's no longer included. With that said, I do believe we make mention to our health and safety management system, and the intent of the policy is evidently to have a robust health and safety management policy in addition to maintaining that certificate of recognition, which is offered through our certifying partner in alignment with PIR. So it's quite convoluted. So I do think that that's okay. And the second point there, you just remind me of what that was that you brought up?
The workplace safety manual.
Oh, yes. So we wouldn't want to make direct mention to like safe work practices manual. We would want to make mention to like a health and safety management system.
To supplement what Director Donaldson's saying, so the past approach identified a couple of components. Partners in injury reduction, and having that safe work practices manual. Those are only pieces of a comprehensive health and safety management system. And so this is a bit higher order, where the old one picked a couple of specifics that for whatever reason were identified rather than the comprehensive system that has the intent of this policy.
Thank you, both to Director Donaldson and CAO Given, and Mayor Island. Any other questions, comments? No other councillors? Councillor Waxer?
Again, being a word nerd, under that first number 1 policy, I read it over and over again and felt the word workplace was missing in the second sentence. The health and safety program aims to reduce the risk of workplace injuries, illnesses, and incidents, because it doesn't, it's so general as it doesn't indicate or its own workplace injuries. It just feels like it's kind of floating. It doesn't speak to the fact that it isn't. It's only speaking to its own workforce.
Director Dawson.
All right, thank you. Sorry, just fighting the microphone there. Thank you, Councillor Waxer, through Deputy Mayor or Acting Deputy Mayor. Yes, I would agree. I think we can definitely, as mentioned before, just incorporate feedback. That's the purpose of this. So at all levels, between the committee, senior leadership, and as well as mayor and council, I think it's important that everything that's brought up today, I would recommend we do incorporate that, and I don't mind taking one final look at it too as well, just to ensure that we have unity with wording and voice throughout the policy, that it's meeting the intent that we as an organization hope to have.
Sorry, the other thing that I wondered about is the wording under CAO, that ensuring all staff employed in the municipality are in compliance with this policy and approve related procedures. I just felt that may be challenging for the CAO to actually oversee all of that, so I wasn't sure if that wording, maybe it's just standard, but I wondered about the response, putting that in those particular words.
CEO Given.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Malik. So certainly from my perspective, I don't have a concern about that. It is an obligation of the CAO to consider the safety of all of our employees as the single administrator. The wellness and safety of all employees is my responsibility. I certainly take it as such. And I don't mind it being defined that way in the policy. And I think that this is in alignment with best practice and obligations under the legislation.
I'm happy with that.
Other councillors? I just would like to just make sure there is a reference to the core program. See, and the importance of that is that by being part of that program, we actually see reductions in our workers' compensation cost to the municipality by maintaining a robust health and safety program. I mean, the overall purpose of this policy is to ensure workplace safety for our workers and our contractors. But there's an additional benefit that the public may not see, but should understand that it's critical in our administration to ensure that we don't have lost time accidents, we don't have people on extended periods of time away from work. So I applaud the revision to this policy, and I would look to councillors, if there's no other comments, for a motion. Councillor Waxer.
The committee recommend council approve policy E-109 health and safety as amended. As with incorporating the recommended changes.
CEO Given.
Deputy Mayor Malik, appreciate the discussion today. I think there's a number of different items identified, and Director Donaldson just discussed the potential of reframing it in a more active voice. Maybe an approach here would be to direct administration to take away the policy to incorporate the changes that were discussed and bring back a future committee of the whole meeting. That way you'll get a chance that way administration will have an opportunity to take some time and go through the policy again with another look. And the turnaround time will be a little bit easier. And council will have the benefit of being able to have more time to consider any updates or changes that we bring forward rather than having to do it sort of before next week.
Councillor Wexler.
I'll accept that amendment. That, sorry, that, committee,
No, just the alternative.
pardon? Okay. Okay, I was looking at the paper rather than the, document. That committee direct administration to revise policy E109 and return to a future committee meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Waxer. Administration has heard comments from council, and we will now, if there's any comment or any discussion on the motion. I am seeing no hands. All those in favor? Ladies and gentlemen, Councillor Deputy Mayor Wilson has returned, and we're going to execute a change here without going offline, and it'll take us about a minute to do that.
Thank you for that, alternate Deputy Mayor Melnick. We're moving on to new business item 7.3, Municipality of Jasper's Climate Change Adaptation Action Plan. And we have Mona Eldabi here in person, as well as Director Sanders, and I'll look to Director Sanders to kind of start us off.
Sure, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Wilson. I'm pleased to introduce Mona Eldabi here to walk you through the draft version of the Climate Adaptation Action Plan. This would have been in front of you a little bit sooner, except that we did experience a climate incident 11 months ago. And Mona has been working quite hard behind the scenes in the early days post our disaster on fire smart activities. So there's been a delay in getting this to you. Just want to acknowledge that our resources were appropriately applied to help us with our resilience in the future when we look at wildfire. But Mona's going to walk you through the adaptation action plan at a high level, and then we're available for any questions. What's in front of you is a draft, and we anticipate, as we've done recently with other things, is we're looking for some feedback. And as appropriate, it will be in front of council for approval. And at that point in time, it will be dressed up into a document that looks spiffy and clean and tidy. So with that, I'll pass the microphone over to Mona.
Yes, thank you, Beth. Yep, so the recommendation in front of you is that committee recommend council approve Jasper's Climate Adaptation Action Plan as presented. So a brief background, back in early 2024, Committee of the Whole received Jasper's Climate Risk Assessment Report for information. And then in late summer of 2024, Council directed administration to proceed with developing the 5-year Climate Change Adaptation Action Plan using internal resources. So as Beth mentioned, this is the draft in front of you. So a Climate Adaptation Action Plan aims to enhance the municipality's resilience to climate hazards and enable the community to better adapt, manage, prepare for climate risk. The main climate hazards that this report focuses on is wildfires, wildfire smoke, extreme heat, freezing rain, which is different than hail, and glacial recession.
Particularly, these were taken from Jasper's climate risk assessment report, as Associated Engineering recommended that the municipality develop this adaptation action plan specifically targeting the highest risks. So the action plan itself identifies clear vision, goals, and objectives, as well as a list of adaptations, which are inclusive of financial implications at high level at the time being, to help the community adapt to these climate risks while meeting community needs. For each adaptation that you'll see in Appendix B of the report, the climate hazard addressed is indicated, followed by descriptive information such as the effective system. So that's going to be a recurring theme here. The systems are our built system, natural system, social system, as well as our economic system, which is predominantly tourism. Then there'll also be each action will address the priority, the type of action it is, a responsible department or departments, the timeline, cost, and if we can work with partners on those actions. So some examples of high priority actions will address wildfire. Will be geared towards wildfire prevention. It could be HVAC system upgrades, cooling centers, and clear air shelters, park and public space management to include shade structures and cooling spaces, as well as education campaigns and strategies. So in summary, a climate adaptation action plan will help a municipality safeguard critical infrastructure, protect essential services, and ensure the well-being of all residents. Our plan aims to help create a path towards a stronger and more adaptable community with proposed actions that will support the community in implementing measures that reduce potential impacts from climate-related events and hazards that pose a threat. So in that Appendix B, there are 28 key actions just meant to kickstart the municipality on a path towards more preparedness and resilience towards these climate hazards. The next steps in our climate adaptation strategy as a whole would be the implementation and monitoring and review stages. So as briefly mentioned earlier, the financial implications for this current report were all resources used internally. And resources to actually implement the plan will be allocated in future work planning and budgeting processes. That was a bit of the overview. And now if we go into the report itself, it's about 30 pages with 2 appendices. The first one being a community survey we did in May, and the other one being the actual list of actions. Might want to start by just highlighting that at the end of the report, there is a glossary for some of the terms used in the report, as I understand that it could be a bit of a niche environment. So getting acquainted with some of these terms could be helpful. So in general, adaptation in this context includes any initiative or action taken in response to an actual or anticipated climate hazard impact that will lessen the effects on our systems, the built, natural, social, economic system. So they can include things such as monitoring, research, education, capacity building, or changes to infrastructure. My laptop is glitching. The screen isn't going black. Okay, this is okay. Sorry about that. Another important term could be resilience. So that's the ability of a system to anticipate, absorb, accommodate, or recover from effects of a hazardous event in a timely and efficient manner. So that would be a good goal. Then in respect to increased extreme heat, there's the urban heat island effect, which perhaps some of you are familiar with. So that's an urban area that has consistently higher temperatures than its surrounding area due to the fact that an urban environment lacks vegetation and has low reflectivity of building and road materials. Another important term is vulnerability. So that's the degree to which a system is susceptible to or unable to cope with adverse effects. including climate variability and extremes. The vulnerability is a function of both its sensitivity and the adaptive capacity of a given sector. Right. So when creating this report, there was two main resources that were used to structure our report. So that the first one being the Climate Resilience Express, a community climate adaptation planning guide, which is created by the Municipal Climate Change Action Center, in short MCCAC, and All One Sky Foundation. And the second one being ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. They both have an abundance of knowledge and guidance on climate adaptation planning and strategies. So this whole report is generally the third step of the framework, the action plan, the action stage. And the role of government in climate adaptation is important to understand, just help set our goals. So as the municipality of Jasper knows, local governments are already dealing with the impacts of climate hazards. And as municipal decision makers, we have a unique opportunity to develop a tailored approach to anticipate, plan, prepare, and hopefully reduce the negative impacts of climate hazards on our community. So we can do things such as prepare for the climate hazards in a matter to like risk management, as well as part of good governance. Local governments can tailor the strategies to our local circumstances and to the unique set of hazards that we expect to face. And we can anticipate adaptation planning and increase future benefits. So ICLEI identifies 5 key mechanisms available to local governments to help drive our adaptation actions. So that relates to land use and urban planning, licensing and regulation, facilitation, advocacy and leadership, community services, community development, civic engagement, and workforce development. And then there's a section about the cost of inaction. So if we don't do anything, what would that look like? There's also a table about the top 10 natural disasters for insurance payouts. That's from 2023, and as we know, the wildfire happened in 2024. So in 2024, Canada's costliest insured catastrophic losses resulted in an estimate $8.5 billion, of which the Jasper wildfire is now estimated to be $1.23 billion in insured damage. And then later in the report, there's an important part about heat events. So because that's one of our likelihood climate events that we should prepare for, heat events are actually responsible for the greatest loss of life in terms of weather-related natural disasters, according to the Canadian Disaster Database. And I'd like to just point out that the vision for this report is that Jasper is a municipality that anticipates potential climate-related impacts and makes informed decisions that enhance the resilience of our community for the well-being of all and the preservation of our built and natural environments. So this vision came together from the Jasper Community Sustainability Plan, as well as Council's strategic priorities for 2022-2026. Moving on, there is a section about all of the climate hazard descriptions that were included in Jasper's risk assessment. So if you want to go over some of the definitions, in particular, freezing rain would be rain that freezes on impact with the ground or solid objects, so different than hail. Think more of an ice storm type of situation. So yeah, figure 6 is a nice one to look at to see what the change in climate hazard likelihood is for Jasper. As mentioned before, in May 2025, there was a brief community engagement survey that went out. There were some interesting findings. So from that, we know that 47% of respondents did view Jasper's climate risk assessment report 92% would actually like to know more about wildfires. And so I did put a few key percentages in the report there that you can have a look at. And also 92% of respondents chose social media as a preferred way to receive information. Almost 100% of people feel comfortable with social media, the people who participated in the report, in the survey. When identifying and selecting the adaptation options, there were some constraints that were taken into account, such as cost, staff capacity, need for external resources, or competing timelines. So some actions attributed to a short timeline, for example, might include actions that can be done quickly or for a low cost, or that are part of routine operations. And then actions with a longer timeline might require changes to bylaws, more planning documentation, or an increase to a department's operating budget. So the next step in this planning strategy would be the implementation stage, followed by the monitor and review stage. So for effective continuation of this plan, some of the following items that could be considered are dedicated staff time and resources, committing funds, monitoring the results, evaluating the results, and regional collaboration. So a successful aspect of implementation is reaching a point where integrating climate resilience into our community strategies, plans, policies, programs, projects, and processes is routine and customary. For that, any questions?
Thank you for that. And for those of you watching later, this was presented by Mona Eldabi, our Energy and Environment Manager. Councillors, questions for Mona? Maryland?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. Thank you very much for the report. I can't remember the words now. Director Saunders used, you said you'd come back with something that looked shiny, or might have been what you said. I thought this really did shine. It's great. I appreciate it. I have just a couple of comments. And two specifics. Generally speaking, while I like the plan and I favor this sort of action and incorporating this adaptation action plan, I tend to focus maybe too much on words, and adaptation and mitigation don't mean the same thing. And we don't speak much about mitigation. It is mentioned, the word does arise, but some of our actions are, I think, much more focused on mitigation, the fire smart activities in particular, and they are, in my view, fundamental, but not necessarily captured in adaptation, because adaptation, you tend to accept that there are going to be impacts and you figure out what to do about them, whereas mitigation, you're actively trying to minimize the impact. And so some additional focus on mitigation, I think, is warranted. The other specific comment that I have to make is with respect to, it's page 3 of the report. And I think it's page 33 of our agenda. And I note that we're only on page 33 of 123. Until the vision, principles, goals, and objectives, that statement. What we aim to do is broader, I think, than what is mentioned. The underlying importance of this work, it not only enhances the resilience of our community for the well-being of all, as it's stated. There is an element of preservation of life, there is an element of preservation of our built and natural environments. And there is a decided preservation of our economic foundation. And I think that's worth mentioning as one of our goals and objectives. We have seen the impact, as you said at the beginning, of a climate event and what it has done to our local economy. So during the period of evacuation, Tourism Jasper estimated that as a community, we were losing $4.5 million every day. And our economy did not jump back when we reopened and welcomed visitors after the evacuation. And we are still working to make sure that the world knows that we are open and welcoming guests. I think it's important because there will be costs. And it's important to know that one of the benefits is maintaining our local visitor economy, which is foundational. And under that same part of page 13, where you reference phrases from the Jasper Community Sustainability Plan, we did even then specifically mention economic health. And so in my view, there should be a reference in our vision, principles, goals, and objectives to preserving our foundational visitor economy. The same applies a bit in some of the details on page 19, where we recognize that wildfires have an economic impact, and that's not just wildfires from Jasper, it's when smoke blows in from other places. I think the words I read there was that we're at risk of Jasper developing a negative reputation because of wildfires, because of wildfire smoke. And that is true, but it's beyond that. We also risk the welfare of people, their jobs, their businesses. We risk the economic foundation of our community. That is why this is so important to all of us. Why it's important, I think, to recognize that as part of our goal and our objective. So a bit lengthy, and I apologize, but overall, I'm really excited about this plan, and I thank you for the excellent work. Look forward to the next iteration of it when it comes back to council, but I really would recommend adding a focus on mitigation and on the economic benefit of doing this work.
Yes, thank you for those comments, Sammy. So in the vision, I understand that the last bit of it where it says the preservation of our built and natural environments, we can actually just add all of the systems that were discussed. So the built, natural, social, which includes the health and well-being of the community, and our economic environment, and that would encapsulate all of that. Okay, perfect. And then for mitigation, I had the same understanding as yourself when I started working on this. But when you look at the documentation out there, so in this climate world, they seem to give a different definition to mitigation. So I'll read to you the one from our climate risk assessment report. Says mitigation, an action that will reduce or prevent greenhouse gas emissions, such as using renewable energies like wind, solar, making buildings, vehicles, and equipment more energy efficient, and so on. Whereas the regular English definition of mitigation is to reduce the severity and seriousness of something. So in our definition of adaptation, I believe that it encapsulates the true definition of mitigation, so reducing the severity of a climate hazard. Whereas in this whole framework of adaptation planning, they seem to have a very specific idea that when you use the word mitigation, it needs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is a completely different subject or report in its own with different actions. So if we were talking about reducing greenhouse gases within Jasper, we would talk about what do we do with our waste? Can we compost more? Can we make our buildings more efficient? That doesn't impact the climate hazards that are already knocking at our door. So I did have the same understanding of the definition of mitigation as yourself, but because it's already kind of set framework, and so many municipalities have already like understood the term mitigation in the sense of reducing GHGs. I didn't use that word so much because this report is less about reducing climate change and more about preparing for climate hazards.
Thank you for that and for the reference to the alternative definition. I will take that under advisement, and I accept that that is the case. Adaptation seems to me, based on dictionary definitions, get ready, a storm is coming. Mitigation is how can we lessen the severity of that storm before it gets here? And that's why I'm interested in mitigation. And if the definition you are using is mitigation only applies to greenhouse gas emissions, just doesn't work with mitigating the risk of wildfire on the landscape. It's not about emissions, it's about the type of fire that approaches our community, and it's about making homes at the urban wildland interface or within the depth of the community more resilient. That is mitigation. It's going to lessen the impact rather than just adapting to impacts that are coming. But I understand your restriction. You're trying to work with somebody else's definition, which is not quite the same as the dictionary definition of this. So I accept your answer. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I can maybe just add, because I had the same understanding as yourself and other people might have it as well. We can maybe add a section talking about that definition and comparing it to the English definition and saying why when we use the term adaptation, we also do mean prepare and reduce and plan for lessening the impacts of climate hazard.
Councillors, any further questions? Comments? Councillor Waxer.
Thank you, and through you to Mona. I was curious about the discussion about or on the list of things that were considered challenges, that the extreme cold wasn't included. And I wondered where it sat on the list, because I know in the past extreme cold has been occasionally a worry, and when we've had things happen simultaneously, we were looking for shelter and that for those who are vulnerable.
Thank you. Definitely appreciate the local insight on that. When we look at figure 6, which is Jasper's change in local climate hazard likelihood that the risk assessment discussed, extreme cold jumps from a risk 2 to a 3, 5 being the highest. So that's at a 3, whereas the ones that we're discussing are are at the 4 or 5 range.
Okay.
So it does increase in the likelihood, but it still doesn't seem to be as severe or more likely in the short term than the freezing rain or wildfire risk.
Thank you for that.
Councillors, more questions or comments, or a motion to accept the plan? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, and thank you for the presentation. I'm moving to Appendix B and the climate adaptation actions by system. In the report, this basically lays out the framework of how we should be moving forward and planning in the next 4 or 5 years. Is there an opportunity view of this and maybe changing priorities? I imagine there was a grid system or a way of evaluating all of these actions, and would we need to maybe look at these through the next 5 years to perhaps move them up or down in the priority grid.
Deputy Mayor Wilson, maybe I'll respond to that on two different fronts. One, I think that the numbering system is just for convenience, so we can speak about which number it is rather than necessarily the prioritization. So it's, I think in the report, it actually identifies that all of the actions are important. And so it doesn't necessarily prioritize them in that way. So just because there's a number one doesn't mean that that's the most important action. The other thing that I would say is that the list of actions are subject to, future budget decisions. And some of the things are actually things that will need other partners to take action on. So we're not fully in control of some of them. So I think the best way to treat this list rather than sort of a priority is, okay, start at number one, end at number 28, is really, these are the things that we know that we need to start work on as a community now. Subject to future budget decisions, subject to other parties acting within their areas of responsibility. And so council can have that confidence that what this will be used for is administration's future business planning and work planning. And that any items that have a corresponding cost, to the municipality would be flagged in budget discussions in future years.
Thank you for that.
Mayor Island.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. Through you to CAO Given, just following up on Councillor Melnick's question about Appendix B. I was particularly drawn to the comments in the draft action plan related to costs of inaction. Is there any way in Appendix B that there can be an indication both of anticipated costs and the costs of inaction, so that when a future council looks at priorities and what they might fund and what they might not, they have a clearer indication of doing nothing as opposed to the cost of doing something?
Deputy Mayor Wilson, for Mayor Island, I'm going to take a bit of a stab at this and let me think about that. I'll say that the cost of inaction is probably more difficult to quantify, because if you extrapolate sort of the consequences of inaction, the challenge will always be where to stop. And different readers might define different places of stopping. So, and again, just to start at the top of the list, not necessarily because it's the most important, but because it is number one, create an inventory of cooling infrastructure and amenities throughout the municipality. Well, that specific act, what's the cost of not doing that? On one hand, you could say, well, there's no cost to not doing that. We just don't have an inventory. On the other hand, so we could say, well, if you don't have an inventory, then you can't take the actions. And if you don't take the actions, then somebody will get heat stroke and will have lost days of work. And you can appreciate how I extrapolated a consequence there from an action that might not be immediately obvious, and quantifying that will be a bit subjective. So I appreciate the intent. I think administration would agree that if we don't do these things, individuals, organizations, and the community will face greater costs in the future. I think we would all agree with that. Quantifying that, even in an order of magnitude, starts to become more subjective and a bit more challenging from my perspective. Now, Mona has worked in these organizations and with this material. Maybe there's some methodology for calculating those things that I'm not aware of, but I think you can see that it does start to become a bit challenging in some instances. There might be others that are a little more clear cut, but I'm not sure that any of us before the wildfire would have identified the cost of any action that we might have taken before being $1.2 billion. Had we said that the cost of inaction, of any single thing related to wildfire preparedness was $1.2 billion, in the past, we might have been laughed out of the room. And we all recognize now that that's actually a very real reality. Very, very real brutal reality. But it's a fact. But it would have been hard to quantify ahead of time.
Yeah, I can add on that. So sounds like definitely an interesting exercise to do. It could be done at a summary level or more detailed level. So that is also depending on the information available. So for example, if we're trying to estimate what the impact of a climate hazard, to put in like the cost of inaction, or how much would it cost if we don't add a spray park to the park, you know, for the kids and families to enjoy on a hot summer day. Does that mean somebody might, you know, faint and go to the hospital and then incur all of those bills because they were outside and couldn't get, you know, cool down in time? Or does it just mean we're losing on economic dollars because families are like, oh, it's too hot this week, we should not go to Jasper because maybe we wouldn't have time, or they don't have a spray park for the kids to play around in, and we'll be stuck in the hotel room. There's a lot of unknowns. But what I've seen other municipalities do is they've taken those long lists of, you know, 30 actions that they could do. They've narrowed it down to anything from, you know, even 5 to 15. And then they'll do a more detailed page on each one, focusing more on the cost and work behind it. So more of a planning stage for each action. I haven't really seen them do it on the costs for inaction. But I do see how that's important for decision makers.
Director Sanders.
Deputy Mayor Wilson, I think it's appropriate to point out that the purpose of this plan is to identify a series of actions that we can take to adapt. The following implementation is going to have to involve some priority setting, so we can keep council informed about that. The other question about cost, as I was listening to CAO Given describe, you know, would we this time last year have imagined 1.2 something billion as the cost, the financial cost that's been calculated for our disaster that took place 11 months ago? But I think we all know that there are more than financial costs. So there's social costs, emotional costs, physical costs on our bodies. So it's not just the economic piece, it's all of it. Most of which cannot be calculated in any way, shape, or form, right? And even the 1.2 billion, how robust is that calculation? So anytime we're doing those types of things, it's especially pre-event. So when we're talking about adaptation, it's full of assumptions. And what I would hate is for us to get bogged down in getting really clear on assumptions and a model to determine action, and in so doing distract ourselves from taking action. So what we'll take away when this is approved by council, we'll have a list of actions. When we get into budgeting and work planning as an organization, as an administration, we can identify the ones that are really easy to do and just slide into our day-to-day work. And we're also going to identify some things that we're going to have to make a more pointed effort at doing. And there'll be budget implications, and that we'll be transparent about as well.
Councillor Hall, and then Mayor.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Wilson. I really like this, and it's actually really nice to see you in person and meet you in person. One thing I was wondering, I haven't really seen, or even around the climate hazard descriptions, you've got heavy snow, but there is an implication when we have a lack of snow in the wintertime with our biggest winter operator, the ski hill. And I just that was my only comment, was that definitely it, you know, has a direct impact on the livelihood and the economy in the wintertime. With the lack of snow, or the shift in snowfall, it seems to come later and last later. My own comment.
Yeah, very good comment. Thank you about that. I'll have to put some more thought into that, see if I can gather information on precipitation elsewhere, because looking at figure 6, but like you said, I don't see it either. There's heavy snow that seemed to remain at risk 3. But then maybe I can do a little bit more research to see how changing climate is affecting snowfall.
Mayor Island.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. I just wanted to say on the record that my calculation is different than what was presented by Mr. Given. The cost of inaction was the potential loss of our entire community, not 30% of it. So that loss would have been 3.6 billion plus the absence of any industry for 3 or 4 years as we tried to rebuild all of our critical infrastructure. So the cost was not what we lost. It was what we might have lost had we taken no action. I appreciate your earlier responses to the difficulty of calculating the cost of inaction. But I think it far exceeds the losses we suffered. It should be measured against what we might have lost had we taken no action at all. Those losses are just so stupendous and beyond calculation, but way higher than the 1.2 billion of insured loss.
With that, anything further, councillors, or? Nothing further from councillors, maybe Councillor Waxer.
Sorry, as I was looking at the costs of inaction, I was very much reminded of in the past working in the social return on investment model, and it very much mirrors that. And I think it's something that the people working in the social field have struggled with for decades, and I think it's really an important lens to put on this as well. Not in terms of making our decision making necessarily, but I think explaining why it's so critical to invest in these areas.
Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. Seeing as there's not any further comments, I would like to make the motion committee recommend council approve Jasper's climate adaptation plan as presented.
Thank you for that, Councillor Melnick. Any debates? Not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That much carries. Thank you. Thank you all for this presentation and presenting that plan. And thanks for coming in person.
Thank you. Nice meeting everyone in person.
Okay, we're moving on to agenda item 7.4, Alberta Municipalities Awards. I'll look to CAO Given to take us through this.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Wilson. Hopefully this will be a brief report. Administration is recommending that committee authorize administration to submit Alberta Municipality Award nominations for recognizing leadership during the 2024 Jasper Complex Wildfire and 2 different categories: the Award of Excellence for Mayor Richard Ireland and the Dedicated Senior Team Award for Municipality of Jasper Senior Leadership Team. Alberta Municipalities, as council knows, has a number of different award categories to recognize exemplary service. Over the course of the past year, obviously we've seen exemplary service as a number of different aspects throughout the organization and in the community. And these would just be 2 small ways to recognize that for the administrative team representing all of the municipal organization, and Mayor Ireland, who obviously undertook some pretty significant leadership through the course of the past year. So I don't feel that I need to go into a great level of detail on either of those 2 points. The process from Alberta Municipalities does require a council motion. They do have a deadline for submission of the 27th, so while we wouldn't be able to get to regular council, we believe that a committee resolution or motion should suffice. Administration is prepared to submit the forms that are required, and the selection among the forms that Alberta Municipality, or the nominations that Alberta Municipalities receives, is handled by a committee of the organization. The recognitions and awards are announced in the fall at the Alberta Municipalities Convention, which will be following the 2025 fall election in October.
Thank you, Mr. Given, and yeah, thank you very much for bringing this forward. Comes with my support for sure. Councillors, we'd like to speak to Councillor Waxer.
I just thought I could make the motion now and then we can debate after the fact sorry.
Just before you make the motion, if I may, it puts me in an uncomfortable spot. And yet, another deficiency in the Municipal Government Act is that the only reason I can recuse myself is pecuniary interest, and that doesn't exist. But you can imagine that there's a level of discomfort. So if you could bring forward a motion separately, two motions, I would very much like to vote with respect to the submission of an award for a dedicated senior team, and just sit on my hands for the other one, if the deputy mayor will allow that.
I was gonna say, I think you're required to vote, and there's, I don't think I'll allow it. We'll follow it, we'll, Councillor Waxer, would you like to make the first motion?
That committee authorize administration by resolution to submit to Alberta Municipalities Award nominations recognizing leadership during the 2024 Jasper Complex Wildfire for the dedicated senior team award for the Municipality of Jasper Senior Leadership Team.
Thank you for that, Councillor Waxer. Would anybody like to speak to the motion? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That motion carries. Well, councillors, Marilyn got called out on a call, but we'll move forward on this next item, as he will be absent. Any councillors like to make a second motion? Councillor Waxer.
That committee authorize administration by resolution to submit Alberta Municipalities Award nominations recognizing leadership during the 2024 Jasper Complex Wildfire Award of Excellence for Mayor Richard Ireland.
Thank you for that, and councillors, will give you the opportunity to speak to the motion if you'd like. Not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That motion carries. Thank you for that. We'll move on to item 7.5. Councillor Melnick.
I sense the next item will be a little bit longer, and may I request that we take a 5-minute health break and be back at well, not even 5 minutes.
You bet, and I think we will have a lunch break most likely as well, but not right now. We'll do a 5-minute break. We'll do the next item, and I think we might have to have a break before we finish off the rest of the item, but we'll see where we're at. Quick break, 5 minutes. Thanks for your patience, everyone. We are back at it, and we're heading into agenda item 7.5, Jasper Wildfire Recovery Needs Assessment Report. And we have Director Fark and Manager Douglas.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Wilson. Good pronunciation of Olaf. Who's gonna do that? No problem at all. The request for decision before you at the moment is that is with respect to the Jasper Wildfire Recovery Needs Assessment Report. The recommendation to council is that the committee recommend council receive this report for information and direct administration to incorporate the wildfire recovery needs assessment report findings into future work planning. The alternative being that committee receive this report for information and take no further action. So some background about this report, which is included in your agenda package, is that on February 17th, 2025, the Jasper Recovery Coordination Center launched a survey to evaluate the recovery needs of Jasperites who were residing in Jasper at the time of the 2024 Jasper wildfire. The survey was circulated to 800 resident households selected at random from a list of 4,035 households that were registered with the Canadian Red Cross during the wildfire evacuation. So as we know, in addition to the destructive impacts of the wildfire on the natural and built environments, the wildfire resulted in wide-ranging socioeconomic disruption. Recovery from the wildfire will require collaboration amongst a diverse set of partners, with a specific focus on addressing the needs of residents as they rebuild their homes, their businesses, and their community. The Jasper Wildfire Recovery Needs Assessment Survey forms an integral component of a strategy to provide accurate, actionable data to guide these collaborative efforts. The Needs Assessment Survey was developed in collaboration with members of the JRCC Social Recovery Working Group, with input from data specialists at the Canadian Red Cross and researchers at the Conference Board of Canada. Preliminary data analysis was conducted by data specialists at the Canadian Red Cross in collaboration with municipal staff from JRCC. And the report was prepared on the basis of that preliminary analysis by municipal JRCC staff. The survey itself employed statistical methods to produce robust and reliable descriptions of the recovery needs of households that were resident in Jasper in 2024. And as I mentioned, that includes 4,035 households that were registered with the Red Cross. That's significantly more than were recorded in the most recent Canadian census, reflecting the seasonal residency of Jasper in the summertime. These statistical methods allow for reliable inferences to be made about the total population based on data gathered from a smaller group of population. And in order to be reliable, the sample must meet a mathematically derived minimum size, and every individual, or in this case household, must have an equal probability of being included in the sample. Basics of statistical analysis. To that end, this survey was distributed at random to those 800 households, and we received what would be considered an excellent response rate for an online survey of 45.6%. That exceeds the minimum requirement size for a reliable statistical survey. The survey covers 6 areas of need: financial, health, housing, access to supports, recreation and community activities, and transportation. It includes questions about the demographic makeup of respondent households, which allows for some inference about the effects of the wildfire across different groups within the community. It also provides insights into the needs of Jasperites who were residing in Jasper at the time of the fire, but who have relocated outside of the community, either temporarily or permanently. No personal information was collected during the survey, and the report presents data at the aggregate level. To highlight some significant findings from the survey, we found that variation in post-wildfire experience across demographic groups highlights the importance and the value of targeted and case-managed supports. More than half of the respondent households indicated they were experiencing financial difficulty, with higher rates amongst displaced residents, renters, uninsured households, and those whose homes were damaged or destroyed. Widespread mental health challenges were indicated and suggest the need for varied and diverse mental health supports, ranging from conventional clinical supports to socially embedded peer supports. Rates of participation in recreation, arts, and volunteering dropped significantly after the wildfire, with specifically high rates of decline amongst households including newcomers to Canada and members of groups at risk of exclusion. 42% of respondents' households were still displaced from their homes 6 months post-wildfire, which underscores the critical importance of interim housing and the need for ongoing outreach to Jasperites residing outside of the community. Finally, transportation challenges were markedly higher amongst households displaced outside of the community, underscoring the value and importance of regional transportation. This survey will provide a basis for the development of new recovery programming, will also help with the refinement of existing programming that addresses the needs of Jasperites as we recover from the wildfire. Our plan and our needs assessment strategy is to conduct similar surveys on an annual basis, so that we are developing an ongoing and up-to-date picture of recovery needs and adapting programming to those needs as they change. The ongoing evaluation of needs will also draw on other sources of data, including the Municipality of Jasper's annual social assessment, to go through some of the other points about this assessment. It connects with some points of strategic priority for council, including taking proactive steps to reduce the risk of people becoming vulnerable and to respond when they are vulnerable, as well as to strengthen our voice by partnering with those who share our interests. And in this case, that would mainly be the Canadian Red Cross and the Conference Board of Canada. Inclusion considerations. This wildfire recovery needs assessment survey was designed to provide a detailed picture of how recovery challenges impact various demographic groupings within the community. I mentioned, for example, renters versus homeowners. I mentioned as well households including newcomers to Canada, groups at risk of exclusion, which is an umbrella category that also that includes persons of color, Indigenous persons, LGBTQ2S+ individuals, seniors, families with children, essentially households who would have characteristics that might lead to their being excluded from or face additional vulnerabilities in various areas. The relevant legislation is the JRCC Social Recovery Working Group Charter, which is a charter, a set of objectives and guiding principles established by partners involved in social recovery related to the wildfire. And this work was all accomplished by municipal staff in partnership with those external partners and requires no additional expenditure either now or going forward. I have a slide deck to cover some other highlights from this report, and if it pleases council, I would be happy to go through that now.
Please, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right. There we go. Okay, so some of this will cover things I've already mentioned. So I think it's important to note that in wildfire situations, we find new socioeconomic challenges, and we also see the exacerbation of issues and challenges that predated fire. That finding is held up in the survey. I mentioned, of course, the survey strategy. To go a little bit more about why we focus at the household level, I mentioned the list of 4,035 households that registered with the Red Cross. That list represents a very nearly a comprehensive list of all the households that were resident in Jasper at the time of the wildfire. We might have approached this survey at the level of the individual, but we didn't have access to a comprehensive list of all the individuals that were residing in Jasper at the time of the fire. And so without that list, we couldn't estimate the total population, and we couldn't estimate a response rate or a coverage rate. So that was the reason for going with that household level of survey. Looking at the demographics that were covered by the survey, one of the sort of standout findings was that 92% of respondents indicated that they were year-round residents in Jasper. That was quite a bit higher than what we might have expected, given the number of seasonal residents that are in Jasper. There are a number of things that might explain that. People might expect to become year-round residents in the future. People might also expect to receive some benefits that are only available to year-round residents. It's just notable, we don't necessarily have a concrete explanation for that, but notable that a very high number of respondents indicated that they were year-round residents. We can also see that the reported incomes of households skews somewhat lower than what we found in the census. That again could be a result of having a large number of seasonal residents in the population at that time. It could also result from a misrepresentation or misreporting of income. The financial impacts of the wildfire, as measured in the survey, include that more than half of households indicated financial difficulty resulting from the wildfire. These figures were significantly higher amongst certain demographic groups, namely low-income households. Households with a reported income of between $10,000 and $39,000 reported financial difficulty at a rate of 71%. Those who were reported being private renters reported financial difficulties at a rate of 69%. And those with damaged homes, 65%, those with destroyed homes, 59%. So again, what we see is a considerable difference in impacts amongst those different groupings. With respect to insurance, we found that 56% of respondents with damaged or destroyed homes were insured, meaning that 44% were not. 60% of those with insurance indicated that it would not cover that they expected would not cover all of their costs, or that they were not sure that it would cover all of those costs. So the lack of insurance and the lack of adequate insurance coverage was a major issue for many respondent households. The lack or inadequacy of insurance coverage was correlated strongly with having financial difficulties. Should mention that one of the things we find across all of these findings, we did not expect in this survey to find anything surprising or counterintuitive. The purpose of the survey was to confirm what we expected to find through our knowledge of wildfire experiences in other affected communities, to confirm that we were developing and implementing programming that was responsive to those needs, and to help dial in or refine our approach to better address the specific needs of Jasperites. So across all of the findings, we don't really find anything that stands out as a great surprise. I think that in essence speaks to the fact that we had a strong approach to begin with, and we were addressing needs that were in fact real and are reported by Jasperites. With respect to employment, of course, we found higher rates of financial hardship amongst households experiencing unemployment, as well as households facing reduced hours, which was widespread throughout the community. People who didn't lose employment but did face reduction in their working hours. And a relatively high rate of 65% of those not working having difficulty or not being able to access employment insurance. Financial struggle was manifest primarily in difficulty affording the staples, difficulty affording food, housing, food, and clothing as the three most frequently reported challenges in that order. We also found that households with children experienced financial difficulty and experienced difficulty with those specific items at a higher rate. So some of the findings or the analysis of those findings suggests that case managed financial supports are vital. Again, having supports that are specifically tailored to and targeting the demographics that are experiencing higher levels of financial difficulty, and that blanket financial supports would be an inefficient approach to addressing, given that there are limited resources. Applying a blanket support across the community would be an inefficient approach. Findings also support that mental health supports, childcare services, and programs that promote community inclusivity could have positive impacts for financial stability amongst wildfire-affected households, and that assessed needs indicate the need for supports aimed at easing access to housing, food, and clothing specifically. Moving on to some health impacts, and recognizing there's a lot here, so I'll try to move relatively quickly. We found that very few households reported unmet needs with respect to physical or serious physical health issues. Or in contrary, more than half of households reported that they were experiencing stress or mental health challenges, and fewer than half had been able to access supports. So that equates to 28% of respondent households reporting unmet needs with respect to stress and mental health. Those rates were higher amongst households including children and households including members of groups at risk of exclusion. Some of the analysis there is that mental health impacts were widespread, and as I mentioned earlier, they suggest the need for a varied approach to mental health programming, including traditional clinical approaches to mental health support, as well as community-embedded peer supports. We should also be paying specific attention to lowering or eliminating barriers to access to mental health supports, and to addressing the mental health needs of families and children. With respect to housing, we found that 35% of respondents were homeowners, 36% were renters, and 27% were in staff housing. 34% of respondents had lost their homes, and a further 18% had significant damage to their home. That only 20% of respondents had access to housing support. It's important to note that the survey period overlapped with the introduction of interim housing. So as we were surveying specifically around housing, interim housing was not yet an option for virtually all respondents. At that time of the survey was just at the very beginning when interim housing was arriving in town, and a few of the people who were housed in hotels were beginning that transition into the interim housing program. 42% of respondents 6 months after the wildfire were still displaced. Sorry, excuse me one moment. 62% of those displaced were displaced as a result of their home being destroyed. Many of those who were displaced reported low levels of confidence that they would be able to stay in their temporary housing until new housing or the rebuild or repair of their homes. Again, noting that this was prior to the introduction of interim housing, it was notable that housing was precarious for a large number of those displaced 6 months post wildfire. So that high rate of displacement underscores the critical value of interim housing. The large gap in insurance coverage again points to the need for targeted supports to those who are uninsured or underinsured. And the significant numbers of displaced residents residing outside of Jasper suggests the need for targeted outreach to those households, which is something we've been working on, but something for continued focus as we move forward through the recovery to stay connected with and offer support to those who are not currently residing in Jasper. With respect to access to supports, as I mentioned, food, housing, and clothing were major needs, as was income support. I mean, that is reflected in the patterns of accessing supports. 16% of respondents indicated they faced barriers accessing supports, with some of those barriers including ineligibility for certain supports, lack of information, and gaps in service. When we speak about the ease of access to information about recovery supports, we asked a question, we asked respondents to rate the ease of accessing supports on a scale of 1 to 5, a Likert scale where 1 represents very easy and 5 represents very difficult. 81% of respondents rated the ease of accessing recovery information between 1 and 3. So between very easy and 3 at middle ground. So what this suggests to us is that patterns of accessing support are in line with reported needs from elsewhere in the survey. Again, the data indicate the need for targeted supports directed to displaced households and households experiencing financial strain. And responses highlight the importance of a continued emphasis on accessible, multi-channel, trauma-informed communication throughout the recovery period. I would again say that 81% figure suggests that we've had some success with our communication strategy to this point, but we need to sustain that multi-pronged trauma-informed approach to communication throughout recovery. We had some very interesting results with respect to recreation and community activity. We asked respondents what type of activities their household engaged in prior to the fire and what type of activities they were involved in post-wildfire. And what we found was widespread drop-off in participation across the full range of activity types. So prior to the wildfire, unsurprisingly, some of the most popular recreational activities were skiing, hiking, and other outdoor activities, as well as sports and fitness, volunteering. Post-wildfire, we saw 32% reduction in participation in those skiing, hiking, and outdoor activities, 31% reduction in sports and fitness, 37% reduction in volunteering, 55% reduction in music, theater, and performance arts, and a 43% reduction in arts and crafts clubs. When we look at some of the different demographic categories that were analyzed in the report, we find higher rates of drop-off amongst households with children who do some activities, namely gaming clubs or trivia nights, down 57%. Higher drop-off amongst groups, households including members of groups at risk of exclusion, with the standout figure being a 76% reduction in music, theater, and performance arts. And as well, with households including newcomers, we see 50% drop-offs in arts, craft clubs, gaming clubs or trivia nights, and music, theater, and performance arts. These findings suggest that there's a need for the provision and promotion of recreation and community activities of many types. Recreational programming should include targeted and intentional approaches to reducing barriers to address those specifically high drop-offs amongst those various household types, including newcomers, members of groups at risk of exclusion, and households including children. And that likely enhancing recreational programming will require coordination and collaboration amongst various partners at recreation clubs, various theater or arts groups within the community, and of course the JRCC and other recovery partners. With respect to transportation, we saw 14% rate of reporting transportation challenges, but again, we saw higher rates amongst displaced households, households including newcomers, and households including members of groups at risk of exclusion. Some of the reported challenges include loss of vehicles in the fire and inability to replace, the high cost of fuel and insurance, relocation to other communities with limited transportation services, the absence of regional transit here in the Jasper region, and the lengthy and costly commutes to and from Hinton. What this suggests, again, that regional transit between Hinton and Jasper could address some responding concerns about the expense associated with commuting. The differences between demographic groups indicate continued accessibility challenges in transit. And that interim housing, and I should say that's actually not indicated in the data because at the time of the survey, Margaret Meadows was not yet developed as an interim housing site, but we do know from our correspondence and our communications with residents at Margaret Meadows that the introduction of Margaret Meadows as an interim housing site has introduced new transportation challenges for some residents. So to conclude, the data here highlight the importance, again, of targeted supports and case managed supports that respond to the different experiences of various demographic groupings. That widespread mental health impacts suggest the need for a variety of accessible wraparound mental health supports. That displaced Jasperites living outside the community require targeted outreach and support. That sharp declines in participation in recreational and community activities suggest the need for a diversified approach to recreation opportunities and enhanced accessibility. And that transportation challenges amongst displaced residents indicate the value of regional transit solutions. For our next steps, the Jasper Wildfire Recovery Needs Assessment Survey, which provides the baseline of our assessment of needs, will be repeated on an annual basis going forward, as I mentioned, and that will be reported back to council and to other recovery partners. The JRCC and partners will continue to develop and deliver programming interventions that respond to identified needs identified through this process and through other sources of data. And that the evaluation of recovery needs will continue to be an ongoing priority throughout the recovery period. The full report is included in your agenda package. I'm more than happy to take any questions. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much for that extensive report. Councillors, comments, questions? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, and thank you for clarifying the time the survey was conducted. Towards the end of your presentation, you indicated that this would be a baseline and there'd be subsequent surveys. When would the next survey be to compare to the results that were presented today?
Through you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, to Councillor Melnick. Discussions about the next round of survey are ongoing. The natural inclination would be to repeat the survey at the 1 year mark following the first survey. There are some additional considerations because the Conference Board of Canada, who's been an important partner in this survey, have an ongoing research project around Jasper's recovery, and their timeline doesn't necessarily align with the annual survey being repeated at the same time as the first. There is some consideration towards doing the second survey in the fall. We would avoid trying to survey in the summertime when people are obviously very busy in Jasper. And so either in the fall or repeat it at the 1 year mark following the first survey would be the natural next opportunities.
Thank you. I wasn't aware the Conference Board was part of the group that's been formed to conduct the surveys and this analysis. It's very extensive and very informative. And this was before the interim housing was being introduced, so it will be interesting to see what change the interim housing would make on some of the results from the survey.
I can just quickly respond to that through you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. I think we often speak of housing as the foundation of recovery. And so I think you're absolutely right that with the introduction of interim housing, we are likely to see changes across most of the categories covered in these surveys, and we look forward to sharing these results when they're available.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Awesome survey. I'm looking forward to the new survey as well, especially now with the regional transportation, Carnage Place and the housing. And I found it very interesting on recreation and how people were participating. I think many groups were starting to get back up and going after they also came back. And with the recreation center and the pool just opening kind of the end of December into early January, I think that kind of might have had an effect on some of those percentages as well. So I'm really looking forward to see that now that, we're back into summer, the internal housing is there, that the recreation center and the pool and everything is back running, that hopefully this will show a big shift in that.
Through you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, to Councillor MP, I agree with you entirely. With respect to recreation, there have been a number of developments there since the survey was conducted. The introduction of a new recreation coordinator position within the community development department, as well as many local groups finding access to funding through various recovery partners and initiating programming. 1 point of data does not represent a trend. And so we do need to have that follow-up survey to establish trends and change over time. And I think it's quite right that we will see major changes that result from housing, from the introduction of regional transit, and from the revitalization of recovery or recreational activities in the community. So thank you for that.
Councillor Waxer.
I just wanted to thank you very much for a really detailed and comprehensive report. And I too was really struck by the reduction in recreational and community activities, the decline in that. And I agree that we've got more things in place now, that there may be an uptake there, but I think we also can't ignore the connection between mental health status and participation in community activities. So I think it's something that we must keep on our radar in the meantime.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, and I agree with Councillor Waxer. I've just written down declining mental health could have a direct impact on declining recreation activities, and not just because there aren't activities, because people are sad and they don't want to go out and do things. So yeah, but it was a great survey. Thank you. Mr. Olthoff.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. Thank you for really thorough report. Much appreciated. This is far beyond my knowledge, so maybe you can help me through with sort of the statistical validity of all of the survey and what we can read into it. So the 800 family units were randomly selected, but the response was voluntary. And you've indicated in the report that the response is skewed towards the lower income bracket. I assume that skew initially then is going to skew results. And it is probably incentivized by the fact that those in the lower income brackets are more inclined to respond because they are more in need, whereas the higher economic brackets wouldn't be as incentivized to respond because they're looked after, their insurance problems and all the rest of it. So it changes perhaps just minimally, it seems to me, all of the results. So what do we read into that, if anything, when we're trying to look at, as you said, trends, and we can't do a trend from one point in time, but all of this is skewed one direction. How should we accept the information based on?
It's an excellent question, and one I'm very happy to respond to. Excuse me, through Deputy Mayor Wilson to Mayor Ireland. The skew that I referred to with respect to the reported income brackets was with respect to the 2021 census. So when we look at the reported income of those who responded to the needs assessment survey in comparison to the 2021 census, that's where we see the skew. That doesn't necessarily mean that respondents with lower incomes responded at a higher rate. It might mean that the income characteristics of the community in the middle of the summer with a summer workforce, temporary resident population are different than those who are captured by the census. It's also the case that in a voluntary survey of this type, income is self-reported and not verified. And so when you ask individuals to report their total pre-tax income, they're estimating. And so the income data captured by the census are likely more accurate than were captured by a survey of this type. That might also explain some of the skew. So that in some way addresses the question of the difference between what's recorded in the census and what's recorded in this survey. But the point about the general reliability of the statistical data is a very valid one. When we look at the sample size required for a valid result, we're looking at characteristics across that entire sample of 800 who were sampled in the survey vis-a-vis the whole population of 4,035. When we start breaking down into some of these smaller demographic groupings, for example, households including newcomers, households including members of groups at risk of exclusion, the sample size gets smaller. And so the reliability of the data becomes less reliable. So we have to treat all of that with some grain of salt. The response rate, because it's a voluntary survey and we don't get 100% response rate, it's not a census, it's not a comprehensive survey. The response rate allows us to estimate the validity or the reliability of the data. So whereas if you simply put the survey out to all 4,035 households and accepted as many responses as came in, you might have a larger number of surveys to review. You might have, for example, 800 responses, but you have a response rate that's, what would that be, 5%? That would be much less, it would be much more difficult to estimate the reliability of the data, even though you had a larger number of responses. So while we have to treat all statistical data with some skepticism, and we have to look at the estimated reliability, that sort of 95%, 19 times out of 20 figure that would be applied to this on the broadest scale, the statistical approach allows us to have an accurate estimation of the reliability. And in the absence of the ability to do a comprehensive census survey, that's essentially the best strategy we have.
Thank you. I asked an inside baseball question and I got the answer. That was excellent. I really appreciate that thorough response. Thank you.
Councillor Hall?
Thank you. I do have one question. With the next survey, will it be the same selected group or a new randomly selected group?
It would be a procedure. Through you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, to Councillor Hall. It will be again a random sample, and because of that, it won't be the same individuals. And again, using that statistical methodology, we would be able to estimate the representativeness of that new sample, and it should essentially match what was done in the first.
Councillors, any further questions? Comments? Councillor Hall?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. With no more questions from the table, I would make the recommendation that committee recommend council receive the report for information and direct administration to incorporate the wildfire recovery needs assessment report findings in future work planning.
Thank you for that, Councillor Hall. Any debate? Not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? They're not opposed. Thank you, Mr. Olthoff. Dangerous.
Thank you very much.
Councillors, want to keep pushing on through? Yeah. Okay, we're moving on to item 7.6, extended producer responsibility discount. CO Given.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Wilson. Director Donaldson is just going to join me at the table here. She is the subject matter expert on the report and has come up with a recommendation for council. Actually, I'll let Director Donaldson share the top line good news about this.
All right. I was gonna say good morning, but I'll say good afternoon now. Thanks for having me here today. We're bringing forward a recommendation in response to Jasper's participation in the Alberta Extended Producer Responsibility Program, which officially launched on April 1st, 2025. As part of this shift, the municipality entered into an 18-month cost recovery agreement with Circular Materials This agreement generates $8,500 per month to offset residential recycling costs for both the municipality and its residential clients. This is a significant benefit that directly reduces the municipality's financial responsibility. These funds were not included in the 2025 operating budget and therefore present an immediate opportunity to return value directly to residents without impacting existing services or requiring budget reallocations. To recognize these savings and provide tangible support to our community, administration is recommending a $5 discount per billing period for all residential recycling customers. This would reduce the current bi-monthly charge from $39.57 to $34.57 and would remain in place through to the end of the contract on October 1st, 2026, at which time we would be renegotiating a new contract. Providing this discount aligns with the polluter pay principle of the EPR program and reflects Council's commitment to transparency, affordability, and sustainable service delivery. This approach ensures all households share in the benefits of the municipality's participation in the EPR framework. Other options do include things such as extending the discount to commercial clients or retaining the savings for broader operational use. However, applying the discount to residential customers allows for administrative ease and equitable distribution among those receiving consistent service levels. This is a proactive, community-focused measure that both rewards residents and reinforces our environmental leadership. We respectfully request that committee recommend that council support the implementation of this discount for residential account holders for the billing start date of July 1st, 2025. And I am open to any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you for that, Director Donaldson. Councillors? Questions, comments, motions? Mayor Island?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, through you to Director Donaldson. Appreciate the recommendation. Hard to be opposed to putting money back in the pockets of ratepayers. But I'm wondering whether there is any investment that we could make of $8,500 a month that would have a greater impact than $5 per household every 2 months. Is there any way that we could use these funds, the unexpected revenue, to do something that would have a more beneficial impact community-wide, particularly related to recycling?
Thank you. Mayor. Okay, thank you, Mayor Ireland. Through Deputy Mayor Wilson there. Absolutely. We have lots of stuff that we could use the funds towards. However, there is some portion of this EPR discount that we are retaining for operational needs. And with that said, we are working towards voluntary service agreements with out of boundary commercial clients. So we do have a verbal agreement now from the Fairmont that they will be looking to participate with us in voluntary cost recovery when it comes to recycling, and we are in discussion with Pursuit as well. So I do think that situations like that will provide us with further revenue, which will enable us to provide those services. So for the particular notion of this, I think it is important that we do redistribute some cost savings to the residential consumer base. Other municipalities, it's been a bit of a 50-50 split. Just for reference, some have provided discounts, some have completely eliminated all of their residential recycling services that they offer as a municipality, and have had a third party come in and essentially reducing any cost to the municipality whatsoever. Hinton was one of those. But I do think this is a nice balanced approach where we can still continue to offer and maintain our same service levels and meet the needs of meet the purpose and intent of the EPR program.
Thank you.
there's any other questions? Mayor, Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, through you. The extended producer responsibility discount, this program, is there, it's through to October 1st, 2026. Is there any possibility that this program will be discontinued by the provincial government or by how this was put in place? And the reason I mention that is that if we do a discount and then the program isn't in place, we have to go back and charge the real cost of our recycling to our ratepayers. They'll actually be hit a double whammy down the road. Or is this a program that we are quite confident will continue for the next number of years?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Wilson, through to Councillor Melnick there. We're fairly confident that this will continue. However, that is why we are targeting this with a specific time frame. In the off chance that anything were to change, we are guaranteed this amount contractually. So again, we would be offering any type of discount in line with whatever contract that we receive from either Circular Materials. And if we do choose to extend the program into more hazardous type products, there is a different organization that we would have to sign a separate contract with. But we would go in line with their timelines for their contract.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Calrampi.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, to you to George Thompson. There's no program for commercial that they can participate in?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, through to Councillor Calrampi. At this time, no. The intent of the program is for residential clients based on, producer pay. The argument behind that, and I did look into it quite extensively, is that commercial organizations are the ones that are actually either producing it or utilizing it more so than the end user. So they have not offered anything as of yet, but we are keeping tabs on it.
Councillor Melnick.
Seeing no other questions from other councillors, and with the explanation that this program was targeted to residential users as opposed to commercial users, I'm comfortable to make the motion that committee recommend council implement a discount for all residential recycling customers for the period July 1, 2025 through October 1, 2026. In recognition of the extended producer responsibility program and contract.
Thank you for that, Councillor Melnick. Councillors, any debate? Not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That motion carries, and we're moving on to last item in new business, 7.7, utilities emergency capital funding request.
All right.
Your thoughts on-
Yeah, thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. So the second reason why I'm here today is to bring forward an urgent matter requiring immediate support for funding allocation from the Utility Capital Reserve. Earlier this year, one of the municipalities' 3 high-capacity water production pumps, pump number 2, suffered a complete failure while the remaining 2 pumps have been operating to meet demand. This left our system without redundancy heading into wildfire season. The risk to water service reliability, especially during peak usage or emergency scenarios, was significant. 2 separate vendor assessments confirmed the failure, and a replacement pump was promptly ordered. The cost of this emergency replacement, including related repairs and instrumentation, is $235,000. We expect the pump to be up and running by mid-July. Separately, structural failure was identified in the water treatment plant entrance slab. This slab is critical infrastructure. It provides access to the chlorine and control rooms and supports key power and communication lines. The damage worsened considerably after its initial identification last fall, reaching a point where immediate repairs were necessary to ensure operational safety and continuity. The project cost for this repair, including reclamation, is $70,000. Evidently, neither of these items were included in the 2025 capital budget, but both represent essential emergency repairs tied to maintaining safe, continuous water service for the community. Therefore, administration is asking for committee to recommend to council to approve a total of $305,000 from the utility capital reserve to address these issues. This is really the only viable financial option at this time. With that said, we will be exploring the opportunity for both of these repairs to potentially be serviced by a DRP. Reason being is that we are having engineering being conducted, reports on both of these, as we do believe that there is some association with the wildfire and its impact, but we cannot guarantee that at this time. So I do want to make mention of that, but it's definitely not guaranteed and want to be forthright about that. So as can be seen within the financial section within the request here, the current balance of the utility capital reserve at the end of 2024 was $2,866,000 and let me start over, $2,866,257. And so, yes, we are just asking for a committee to recommend council to ensure that we can continue to provide safety, service continuity, and regulatory compliance. And I expect probably quite a few questions with this, so definitely open to that at this point in time.
Thank you for that. Councillors, questions? In the absence of any, has the work on this, on the slab entrance been completed? It has already, yeah.
Yeah.
Because it was an emergency. Okay. Councillors, Mayor Island.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, through you, Director Donaldson. The only question I was thinking of asking is the connection to DRP, and you've covered that, so thank you for that. If that application is successful, would we assume then that the recovered costs would go straight back into the reserves?
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, through to your worship there. Yes, that is the intent. So if we were to access or be successful with DRP, the 90% portion of funding would go directly back into reserves.
Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, and I'm happy to see that we do have a capital reserve of $2,866,000 and change, which is the intent of a reserve for this type of thing. And I think reinforces the strategic move that we made earlier in this term to have an allocation for our wastewater treatment plant where we have the funds available for exactly this type of thing. So I am, barring any other comments from councillors, I would be happy to make the motion, but I'll let other councillors speak.
Thank you. I apologize for not asking this earlier, Deputy Mayor Wilson, but on that point about reserves, will this impact reserves designated in our 5-year capital plan going to any other project? I mean, I appreciate the urgency of this matter, and the only viable option is to go to reserves. But will that have an impact downstream on other projects that we have lined up that were to be funded from reserves?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson, through to you, Mayor Ireland. I guess we could argue that yes, it may. With that said, if we look at the financial stewardship that the Operations and Utility Department had last year with its capital projects, I believe they returned for the wastewater treatment plant reserve or sewer reserve close to $500,000, where they came in under budget on certain projects. And whereas on the water side, I believe we were somewhere closer to about the $135,000 mark, being under budget for projects. So with that said, I think it is a system of checks and balances, truly. So I think more often than not that the projects that we do undertake, we have been very good financial stewards with that, and we do try to return money to that reserve whenever possible. So I would like to think that it would not have an immediate impact, but I can't say for certain that it would not have any impact whatsoever.
Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. And with that, I would make the motion that committee recommend council approve the allocation of $305,000 from the utility capital reserve for repairs to the water reduction pump 2 and the water treatment plant entrance slab failure.
Thank you, Councillor Melnick. Any debate? Not a call question. All those in favor? None opposed. That motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 8, motion action list. Mr. Given.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Wilson. I'll be brief. You'll see that there's a number of items that are recommended to be removed. I could go through them if you would like. Climate change adaptation plan was delivered today. The utility rate model council had requested a workshop for interested stakeholders, as council is aware that it's taking place later on this week. So that action has been completed. Workshop is scheduled and will be underway this week. The wildfire strategic priorities, we have received the feedback from the recovery advisory committee. It did come back to committee. There's additional work that's come out of that, but that item from February 11th could be removed. The Grand Yellowhead Public School Division joint access agreement, we're recommending to defer that to next month. I believe the draft is going to the school board, the school district board towards the end of this month, and so we can return back with a final version next month. The correspondence item related to congestion at fuel stations, we'd recommend to remove that. That was the correspondence item getting forwarded to the last council meeting. It can be deleted because that did happen. And you'll see that it's been replaced by administration coming forward with some recommendations. So those are the recommended changes to the motion action list. You'll see that the administration's ticked off a number of the items that were on the to-do list, so to speak, and we recommend that they could be removed.
Thank you for that, CEO Given. Councillors, any questions, comments regarding the motion action list? Look for a motion. Councillor Hall. A motion to approve the updated motion action list. All those in favor? That motion carries, and we're moving on to agenda item 9, councillor upcoming meetings. Councillors, anything to report? Mayor Ireland.
I will be speaking at the Calder Roche Grad in less than an hour. So thank you for shepherding us through this. And tonight there are barbecues for both of the in-town interim housing areas. 5 o'clock for the one at the north end and 6 o'clock for the one at the west end. Councillors are of course invited.
Thank you. Anything further, councillors? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wilson. I will be attending a subcommittee of the Jasper Yellowhead Historical Society planning committee for the 100th anniversary of the Mount Alberta climb, the ascent of Mount Alberta by the Alpine Club of Japan. And that event is going to be taking place in July, I believe, 19, 20, and 21. And more details, I'm sure, will be available. There will be some public opportunities as well for presentations that will probably take place in Commemoration Park on, I believe, the 19th, on the 20th. But yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to celebrate the 100th anniversary of that climb by the Alpine Club of Japan.
Great, thank you, Councillor Waxer.
Yes, this is in the past, but I attended the National Indigenous Peoples Day event on Friday and wanted to offer congratulations to the organizers. It was an excellent event, and that Mayor Ireland was also a participant, and I think that it was well done and well received by the public.
Thank you, Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Wilson. I will be attending a recovery advisory committee meeting this Thursday in the morning. And this is also in the past, but I attended the transit facility grand opening last Wednesday with most of council and just wanted to congratulate him in again on a successful build. The facility is gonna get a lot of use. We also toured the new bulk water fill station and sandy dump, which I think is also going to be very successful.
Okay, great. Thanks, councillors. Moving on, we have item 10, upcoming events. We have of course, the École de Roche graduates that Richard is attending at 1:30 today. It is Stewardship Day as well. Today, Jasper Junior Senior High School graduation is June 26th at 1. And the Canada Day breakfast and flag raising, July 1st, Commemoration Park. There's also stories of resilience, voices from Jasper exhibition opening 6:30 to 8:30 on July 25th at the Jasper Art Gallery. We are moving into in-camera, and I don't believe there'll be any decisions made after the in-camera item. So appreciate the public for attending virtually, and we'll see you next week. No, may I have a motion? Oh, not next week. Not next week. We'll see you June 8th, July 8th. Motion to move into camera. Councillor Waxer, all those in favor? Opposed? We are now in camera.